The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's talk today about Iran, Venezuela, and Syria. And I mentioned yesterday that I want to discuss the Putin angle on the latest Iran stuff, but I also want to talk about it in the larger context. And there's a really good post about this on our subreddit, davidpakman.com/Reddit, which outlines sort of the underlying idea that I want to present to you here. And it's something I've been thinking about, thought about it over the weekend as the Iran news was breaking, and I've continued thinking about it. And the idea is that in the end, Donald Trump may be destined to stay out of Iran and stay out of Venezuela and ultimately stay out of Syria in any serious way, because staying out of those three countries shares a common thread, which is that it's in Vladimir Putin's and Russia's interests for the United States to stay out of those three countries. Now, I know that I have to issue this disclaimer. I hope we can be mature here, okay? This is not Putin is literally telling Trump what to do, although who knows what they've talked about in private. We actually don't know. But it's the trend once again that in the end, when the rubber meets the road, Trump ends up taking the path that is in Russia's interests. And this is not about collusion or Trump criminality or anything like that. It's about geopolitical realities. It's about the realities of the dynamics that are forming, as I've talked to you about many times now, among the three major superpowers right now, the United States, China, and Russia, in a way that is not very good for the United States under Donald Trump. Iran, Venezuela, and Syria are three allies of Russia. And the trend in Donald Trump's presidency, it's not 100%, but it's a high percentage, is that in the end, rhetoric aside, Trump ends up acting in a way that protects or doesn't go against or threaten Russia's interests. And let's go through them one by one here. Trump does a big boy and he attacks Syria, except he attacked an empty runway at an airport after telling Russia that he was going to do it. And it was back up and running within a couple of days, if not more like hours. And so for all of the tough talk, Trump does effectively nothing. Now, this doesn't mean I want Trump intervening in Syria. What we're doing here is an analysis of how Trump's actions relate to Russia's interests, not me saying I want Trump to take A, B, or C action. That's Syria. Venezuela, number two. In the winter, as I told you last week, Donald Trump was looking very hard at going into Venezuela, forcing regime change. To be clear, I don't want him to do that. I'm glad that Donald Trump didn't do that. Don't email me saying I want Trump to intervene in Venezuela, because I don't. But last week I told you that there are some new reports from inside sources which say that Donald Trump simply got bored and sort of lost patience with the complexity of the entire Venezuela thing, which is totally believable. But once again, in the end, it favors Vladimir Putin. Putin and the Chavez-Maduro regime are tight. We know that much of the change in Donald Trump's focus on Venezuela happened after a phone call with Vladimir Putin in early May. And once again, in the end, Donald Trump takes the path that, at least in the immediate, is the one that protects Russia's interests and favors Vladimir Putin. And then number three, we now have Iran. Yes, the bluster against Iran, the threats, the sanctions and threats of sanctions, backing out of the Iran deal, the entire thing we told you about yesterday, including Donald Trump authorizing a strike against Iran over the weekend, but then calling it off. Says it was over civilian casualty estimates, which may be true. But once again, Trump, despite the domineering rhetoric, ends up taking the action, or more accurately, not taking the action that favors Vladimir Putin and is in Russia's interests. So again, please don't make this out to be me saying anything other than what I'm actually saying. I am not saying Trump is personally colluding with Putin on these three foreign policy situations. I'm not alleging or pointing to some kind of conspiracy. I'm pointing out that in the end, Donald Trump is taking the paths here that Putin would want him to take. If you're concerned with what's in the United States' best interests, then you have to be concerned about the U.S. increasingly being in a weak position relative to the two other major superpowers, Russia and China, who, as I've told you before, are increasingly working together at the disadvantage of and exclusion of the United States. Now, maybe you don't care about that. I mean, there are people who, even though they might live in the United States, as most but not all of our audience does, who don't care if the United States is better or worse positioned. And they say, we're all humans. I don't care about country borders. And I don't care. As long as we raise the overall well-being, that's my concern. I don't care what happens to the United States. Many of us, even on the left, who live in the United States are invested in the United States being a good place to live and a place that has a good standard of living and the relationships we would like to see with other countries. And so we do care about this. So please don't start with the, I must be a warmonger stuff because I'm criticizing Trump for not going into Iran, Syria, or Venezuela. I want Bashar al-Assad out for the sake of the Syrian people, but not at the hands of the United States. I think the United States needs to stay totally out of Venezuela. I do not want Donald Trump starting a war with Iran. This is not about me personally. These erratic maneuvers by Trump are odd, baiting Iran into action, pulling the U.S. out of the Iran deal, getting the opportunity to keep escalating, and then now last minute bailing on the escalation. If a Democratic president had done this, it would be every low-rent right-wing analyst on Fox News 24/7 talking about how weak Obama or Hillary or whoever was by virtue of taking the action that Donald Trump has taken. So my concern is the underlying geopolitical concerns that exist here. And number two, whether Donald Trump is actually, in the end, making the decisions that even he believes are in the best interests of the United States. I know that I wouldn't agree with his conclusions about what's best for the United States, but at least I would like to believe that in good faith, that's what his decisions are informed by, even if I would disagree with the conclusions. It's not clear that that's going on based on how at least these three situations are playing out in the end. Let me know your thinking about this. And if you're going to do the conspiratorial, allegations, don't even bother. I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to engage. But if you have a serious thought about what I've laid out here, I actually do want to hear from you. We've gotten away from using the term retard as an insult or in casual language in modern American society because it's not good for people who actually suffer from Down syndrome. It's not good for their families and their friends. It's not good to use that term about people with other cognitive and intellectual limitations. But this apparently hasn't stopped the Iranian president from seemingly seriously claiming that Donald Trump suffers from mental retardation. This was during a live televised address, at least partially commenting on the new U.S. sanctions against Iran that President Donald Trump has announced. Donald Trump, of course, imposing these new sanctions on Iran. The Iranian President Hassan Rouhani calling the sanctions outrageous and idiotic, and adding that, quote, the White House is afflicted by mental retardation and does not know what to do. As translated and reported by the Associated Press from the native Farsi, there are other translations that are a little bit softer, suggesting that the terms cognitive limitations or something along those lines were actually what was used. A disagreement about exactly how it should be translated from Farsi. Now, almost as importantly, but maybe not quite pragmatically, the Iranian president also saying, quote, you sanction the foreign minister simultaneously with a request for talks. And this goes to the erratic and sort of a very strange nature of what Donald Trump has been doing with regard to Iran that I talked about in the first segment, in which we discussed the undeniable reality that in the end, when you put the bluster and the rhetoric aside, Donald Trump's actual actions are going mostly in line with what a Vladimir Putin with Russia as the top priority would want Donald Trump to do. If 4 years ago I had told you that in 2019, world leaders would be calling each other Rocket Man and mentally retarded, I wouldn't have believed it. Maybe some in our audience would, but here we are in 2019, and there's this hilarious double standard among Trumpists who all of a sudden now are pretending that mentally retarded is outside the lines and an inappropriate way to talk about Donald Trump when they've spent the last almost 4 years calling anyone that disagrees with them a cuck. World politics under Obama. Let's generate productive dialogue for the mutual betterment of all humans on Earth. World politics under Trump. Who's the biggest retard or cuck or low energy person? And truly, to take this seriously for a second, because it is serious, people with Down syndrome often care about others and express significant empathy. Donald Trump actually seems to be completely lacking that. Like, aside from this being meant as an apparent insult, most people with intellectual disabilities seem to be better people than Donald Trump, who exhibits cruelty, his bullying nature, greediness, complete self-absorption in every way. And Trump, meanwhile, responding that the Iranian president's mom is gay or something like that. I'm kidding. But seriously, Trump is actually unstable enough that calling him mentally retarded could actually trigger a war. It could actually trigger military action. Remember that Donald Trump just a few days ago approved a strike on Iran without even considering civilian casualties. Later, he was told what they would be, I believe about 150, and then he canceled the attack, or at least he claims that's the reason why. This has the potential to completely derail Trump. And meanwhile, the Trump administration is still preaching it has leverage around the Iran deal, which Trump backed out of. John Bolton, Donald Trump's national security advisor, again is saying all options remain on the table with Iran if they exceed the uranium enrichment limit that is put in place by the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Trump pulled us out of the deal. The United States has no authority to enforce that deal because Trump pulled us out of it. You can have the discussion, and we have had it already, by the way. You can argue there are still other signatories to the Iran nuclear deal that have not backed out. The UK, Germany, our European allies. And maybe you could say they have the leverage to enforce or demand the enforcement of that deal, although the United States has made it quite difficult for them to actually do that. The United States has given away all credibility and leverage to demand adhering to that deal, given that we pulled out of it. And it is absolutely pathetic that even on corporate media, some Trump flackies, flunkies, flacks or flunkies, flackies. I think that's going to be another Urban Dictionary term. Trump flunkies are being allowed to say this, that, hey, Iran still has to stick to that deal. That's going to be up to our allies to decide whether they want to or can even enforce that after the United States has departed from the deal. No one in the Trump administration should even be mentioning the requirements of the Iran deal because we are no longer part of that deal. If you disagree with me, let me know. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day who are supporting the David Pakman Show directly are Catherine Wilson and Ray Feeney. Catherine and Ray, thank you to both of you. Really appreciate your support. Also want to say thanks to today's longtime sustaining member of the day, Roger Lynn. Roger has been a David Pakman Show member for almost 5 years, and 1 year of membership is great. 5 years of membership, even better. Join Catherine, Ray, and Roger by signing up. It takes under 1 minute. It's cheap. It really supports the work that we do. And you get some really great perks, including a daily members-only bonus show at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code available if you want it, but by no means should you feel obligated to take it. This is 2020 is a coupon code that will save you 40%. Okay, if someone came to me and said, David, did you rape this woman? I would say, I would never rape anyone. The characteristics of the person wouldn't be a factor. If they were attractive, if they weren't attractive, it wouldn't make a difference. If they were male or female, it wouldn't make a difference. I just don't rape anybody, and that would be my focus. Donald Trump, however, has previously talked about the attractiveness or the type of woman when he has denied various rape and sexual assault allegations, and there are many of those, and he's done it again. Donald Trump gave an interview to The Hill yesterday, including to Sagar and Jetty, who interviewed me last week on The Hill TV, and Donald Trump has denied the allegation from E. Jean Carroll, saying she's not my type with all due respect, an indication that as far as Donald Trump is concerned, this is not an attractive enough woman for Donald Trump to consider raping. Take a look at the exact quote from Donald Trump. I'll say it with great respect. Number one, she's not my type. Number two, it never happened. It never happened, okay? Totally lying. I don't know anything about her. I know nothing about this woman. I know nothing about her. It's just a terrible thing that people can make statements like that. I say this with respect. She's not my type is code for she's not attractive enough for me to want to sexually assault her or to rape her. But of course, her appearance and her type should make no difference to someone who doesn't sexually assault or rape women. The right answer here is I didn't rape her because I've never raped anyone, and I would never rape anyone or sexually assault anyone or use physical force to get anyone in a situation like the one that is described. If you're asked if you raped someone and you say, no, she's not my type, that suggests there's a type you would be willing to rape or sexually assault. He's not denying that if she were his type, he might have or would have sexually assaulted her or raped her. And remember, Trump is accused of raping his first wife. There are under oath documents from the divorce proceedings, I believe it is, or maybe some other kind of court proceeding about this. Trump also, by saying she's not my type, is continuing this idea that rape is a sexual act when it's a very violent act in reality. It's the exercising of power over someone else, but that's probably a few levels too deep for this conversation, or at least any conversation involving Donald Trump. And for everyone talking about another lying woman lying about Trump raping her or sexually assaulting her, 16 allegations of sexual assault have not taken Donald Trump down so far. He even got himself elected after the grab him by the pussy recording. Would anyone be dumb enough to think that if they add their name and make themselves number 17 or number 18 on the list of people that Donald Trump allegedly sexually assaulted, would anyone really at this point be dumb enough to think that that's going to pull Donald Trump from office? Which gets us to the idea that these women are motivated by what, right? I mean, becoming rich and famous by saying that you were raped, because rape victims end up leading such charmed lives. She's getting death threats from Trumpists, which I'll talk about next. Why do you think so many rapes go unreported? So these ignorant Trumpists who come up with just ridiculous, bogus defense after ridiculous, bogus defense, they seem to have no understanding whatsoever of just basic human psychology and live in a complete and total bubble about how rape accusers are treated in society, particularly when they say that the person that accused them is a prominent Republican politician. We've seen that. We've got a number of examples of how that goes. It doesn't lead to a particularly thrilling and exciting, charmed life. And the idea that that would be the motivation, aside from not being based in fact in terms of basic motivations, there's no demonstrable proof that that's actually how it works out. So now let's get further into what's going on with E. Jean Carroll. I told you yesterday that once again, Donald Trump has been accused of rape. I don't know how many total rape and sexual assault allegations this makes. I read one piece that says E. Jean Carroll is number 16, another that says she's number 13, others say 17. I don't know what the answer is, but the latest accuser is E. Jean Carroll, who says that Donald Trump raped her in a New York City department store in the late 1990s. She goes into specific and very explicit detail about it. Somehow, this garnered very little corporate media coverage. Nothing I was able to find on the Sunday morning talk shows 2 days ago. Only a little bit of coverage yesterday. Joe Biden standing too close to a woman apparently deserved a ton of coverage, but yet another accuser who says the president of the United States raped me gets relatively little coverage. And unfortunately, and this leads to what I was talking about earlier, that accuser, E. Jean Carroll, has now started to receive death threats, as was described to a CNN reporter yesterday. When Joe Biden stands too close to a woman, Joe Biden is the problem, according to the right-wing Trumpists. When a woman accuses Donald Trump of rape, the woman who says she was raped is the problem to those exact same Trumpists. And this is why there's a fundamental problem in fighting people for whom this is just sport. I talked about this last week. We can't stoop to their level because it's an immoral level. But at a certain point, we also need to win and take them out of power. So look at the double standard with the Al Franken and the Roy Moore situations. By the way, Roy Moore is running again, and we'll talk about that soon, maybe later on this week. When Al Franken was involved in an arguably tasteless joke involving a female reporter and a flak jacket, Republicans demanded that Al Franken resign. And Franken did resign after even some Democrats said he should probably go, and he resigned his seat from the U.S. Senate. In retrospect, there are many people now on the left who say, you know, given all the stuff that Republicans have excused, it's not totally clear that Al Franken should have resigned, but he did resign. Meanwhile, you had Republican candidate for U.S. Senate from Alabama, Roy Moore, who was accused of multiple instances of sexual assault, including against teenage girls, and he received 48.3% of the vote from Alabama voters. He lost by under 22,000 votes. Democrats have plenty of scumbags, but the rules are not even remotely the same for how Republicans and Democrats handle this stuff. Who was defending Anthony Weiner, a Democrat who was caught multiple times sexting with various women? Now I don't even remember. I believe one of them was underage. Who was defending John Edwards, a Democrat, for his mistress fiasco, the details of which I don't even remember now? I'm sure you can find someone in a country of 340 million people. Certainly there were some people defending Anthony Weiner and John Edwards, but it was few and far between. Newt Gingrich's affairs while his wife had cancer, Donald Trump's affairs, and 15, 16, 17 sexual assault allegations. Roy Moore, serial accused sex assaulter, gets 48% of the vote. How do we defeat people who have no rules and see this only as the sport of wins and losses and not as real people and real life? I don't know the answer, okay? But at a certain point, we've got to start winning. And this is, you know, I'm not playing coy and saying, oh, Democrats are victims of their own morality and upstanding. There's plenty of scumbags who are in power. There's plenty of scumbags who defend those in power who do bad things on the left, but they're playing by different rules at this point in time. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's abundantly clear that Trump supporters are not going to be influenced by allegation after allegation after allegation. And one way or another, this is a guy who has to be removed. But remember that this is a symptom, okay? The fact that evangelicals voted for him, even though he goes against everything they claim to stand for, the fact that they are totally unwilling to just say, hey, this has to stop, this is not a good guy, it is not something that is going to go away if and when Donald Trump is removed from office or leaves office in a year and a half or 5.5 years. And this is a bigger sort of coarsening of the dialogue, coarsening of morality that we are going to at some point need to deal with. And I genuinely don't know what the answer is. If you have ideas, let us know. We'll have a question about this, a poll question on the David Pakman Show Instagram page later on today or maybe later this week. That's at David Pakman Show on Instagram. And while you're there, follow me. I'm at David Pakman on Instagram. Quick break. Back after this to talk about which centrist Democrats should be the top priorities to primary with more progressive challengers. That's coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Jeff Cohen, who's a journalist, media critic, founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and co-founder of Roots Action, which has identified 15 House members that it considers to be ripe targets for progressive primary challenges. I think, Jeff, for reasons that I'll explain shortly, my audience will be pleased to hear me talking about this. So, I mean, let's just talk first about the general principle. In other words, how should we be thinking of when it makes sense to invest resources in primarying a seat currently held by a Democrat?
Well, people have to understand that challenging an incumbent is not easy. You will generally lose. But what we argue in this report is that if you run a strong primary challenge against a corporate Democrat or a problematic Democrat and you don't win, it still helps you get progressives organized within that district. It helps you win elections later, and it puts a scare into the incumbent to start serving the interests of the constituents more than the corporate donors.
So even if it's going to be a seat that ultimately stays with the incumbent Democrat, there are still specific reasons why it's valuable to challenge some, many, or all of them.
No doubt about it, that a forceful challenge is a success. We've seen this so many places where you don't knock out the incumbent Congress member, but some of the activists who've learned electoral skills, they then become members of the city council or the county council. It really helps build, and I'm not talking about running 2% protest campaigns. I'm talking about getting in the Democratic primary, running a good campaign, learning the electoral skills. Even if you don't knock out the incumbent, it's still worthwhile.
So where my audience has sometimes disagreed with my position on this is that I've said, I'm all about moving the Democratic Party to the left. I want to look at Senate seats. I want to look at the House of Representatives. I'm completely with you. But my pragmatic side also recognizes that in a world of not unlimited resources and there are some limits in terms of how much money there is to be invested in any particular state, district, or seat, there is some calculus to be made about, okay, if we have the option of trying to primary one Democrat versus trying to flip 2 red seats to blue, that it's okay to make more specific analyses of particular districts and states, and that sometimes the right answer might be to leave a relatively centrist Democrat be for some other goal that may be a higher or more achievable or productive goal. Is that general calculus something that you agree with or disagree with?
I agree with it up to a point. Obviously, progressives and their organizations within a locale need to decide how best to deploy those resources. But I began, and the whole organization, rootsaction.org, began in 2011 because we came to this conclusion. There isn't just one problem facing our country, which is the impression you get from MSNBC and at certain news outlets, which is right-wing extremism, right-wing republicanism. We believe an equal problem is that the Democratic Party leadership is so corporatized and so ineffective in fighting for social, economic, racial, environmental justice. So if you begin with the idea that there are 2 problems, sort of equal problems, then I think you and I would agree that sometimes it makes sense to go after a Republican and try to flip it. But a lot of the times it makes sense to go after the corporate Democrat because, frankly, in these bad blues, in this report we just put out with 15 incumbents that should be primaried, 12 of them are in completely Democratic districts. 5 of them are in districts where the Democrats win by 40, 50, 70 points when, Hillary versus Trump.
Sure.
And if you don't primary a bad, corporate, problematic, tired Democrat, you really have no congressional election in your district. It doesn't exist.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think that it sounds like we mostly agree. I mean, I sometimes think about West Virginia, where you've got Joe Manchin, arguably the most conservative Democrat in the Senate, and you have 3 House congressional districts. It's interesting, the idea of primarying Joe Manchin at the same time when I look at, the 2nd district, which is Alex Mooney's, where he won by the smallest margin of any of those 3. I don't know. I mean, maybe it makes more sense to try to flip that than to try to primary Manchin, given the full calculus of the state's demographic, voting demographics and everything. I don't know. Is it crazy to think maybe the resources are better spent trying to flip one of those 3 congressional districts rather than fighting Manchin? I'm not sure. Yeah,
I'm not an expert on the 3 districts, but I'm not arguing with your rationale that progressives need to be strategic. I'm not for Green Party campaigns where you win 2% of the vote. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about running serious progressive campaigns. And in some places where there are limited resources, you may be right. But I have found, as I travel around the country, I do lectures and I bring out a crowd and there's a lot of activists, that one of the great frustrations is people that are saddled sometimes for 10, 20, 30 years with a Democratic Congress member in a very blue district who's not getting the job done, who's pro-corporate, pro-war, and doesn't stand up to Trump. And in those districts, if you're going to have any kind of a congressional role as a constituent, you're going to be running in the Democratic primary against the incumbent. So obviously, in some districts, it won't make sense. I would argue in many districts, it does make sense to primary a problematic Democrat.
So the 15 that you've identified in the report, is there some common thread in terms of political positions that is visible across all 15 that you believe is sort of the most pernicious element that makes you say these are the 15 we should target?
Yeah, and remember, we said at the beginning of the report, the following report is far from exhaustive. It's merely illustrative. There's far more than the 15 that should be primary. But the 15 we profiled, yes, I would say the one thread is corporatism. These are people that, when push comes to shove, side with corporate power over working class, middle class, and poor people in their district. Now, there are some that are extreme. I mean, there are 3 on our list: Schrader in Oregon, Cuellar in Texas, and Costa in California. They get Koch brother money. I mean, they're so far right wing, they're almost Republicans. But then there are the people that are like Meeks. Meeks is in a district in Queens where Hillary beat Trump by 70 points. And he's completely allied. He's liberal on some issues, but he's completely allied with Wall Street. That district should have a progressive. And so the main thread, I think, is these are people that when push comes to shove, they identify with their corporate donors and not middle class and working class people, broadly defined.
This is where I think the representatives currently in the Democratic Party are furthest from the electorate, in the sense that over the last 10, 20, 25 years, you've seen the American electorate in general move to the left on a number of different issues. Many of them are social, right? So when you look at abortion, when you look at gay marriage, when you look at the role of religion in government, for example. But on the corporate stuff, it seems as though the difference between many Democrats and almost all Republicans is so small compared to where the Democratic voters are on this issue.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And a big issue for us was war spending. I mean, Trump asked for the biggest military budget in history last year, and he basically got it. Pelosi immediately issued a statement how she's working with Trump to get the military spending he wants. Schumer issued a statement. And what we found here is you've got a lot of these Democrats who claim they want to tighten the belt. You know, they want to be fiscally conservative because the Trump is not. But they're always for more military funding. And so a big separating line, as you say, is corporate issues. And another separating line is war issues. I mean, one of the most vulnerable people of the 15 is Eliot Engel. He's the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But on foreign policy and war issues and military spending, he's with the Republicans. I mean, remember, most Democrats in the House voted no on authorizing Bush's invasion of Iraq. Eliot Engel of Bronx, Westchester, he voted yes with Bush. Most Democrats were with Obama in the landmark, let's step away from war and let's have this nuclear deal with Iran. And Engel was one of the minority of Democrats who voted with the Republicans against Obama's nuclear deal.
Right.
When Trump says we're going to take this destabilizing, he didn't say it was destabilizing, but it was, move of the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, Engel is one of the Democrats that immediately embraces Trump. So now Engel can be liberal on domestic issues, but what really charges him up and the power he has in Washington is he's the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But he basically has Republican foreign affairs views. He should be out. It's a completely Democratic district.
But thinking about some of the strategy of running some of these campaigns, I mean, what is the right way to go about them? Because often when you see national groups, and I'm not pointing to yours specifically, but in other cases, sometimes when national groups make decisions about which districts should be targeted for A, B, or C reasons, there is not a very genuine and authentic feel to some of the primary challenges. So what's the right way to run these races?
Well, it's complicated. I mean, obviously, Roots Action is part of that mix. We really respect Justice Democrats. We respect Working Families Party. We respect Our Revolution and Progressive Democrats of America and Democratic Socialists of America. I mean, they've all played a role in successful campaigns. Justice Democrats has so far endorsed in 2 of our 15 districts. They've endorsed against Cuellar in Texas, and they've endorsed in New York. Against, I think it's Engel or Meeks. The problem, what not to do, and this is a problem we're finding already for 2020, is that in a number of these districts, there's 2 progressives that have gotten into the race. And 2 very strong progressives. And that's a way that helps the Democratic corporate incumbent stay in office. So we know one thing not to do is split up the progressive vote, and as you've been pointing out, split up progressive energy. So that's where organizations are sort of important early now in looking at the candidates and deciding who's the most progressive, who can win, or who is the most progressive, who will run strong, and then try to convince people to rally around that one candidate. I know it's often difficult because there's often legitimate differences of opinion.
Very interesting report. We'll be linking to the work of Roots Action in the description to the YouTube video for our interview. We've been speaking with Jeff Cohen, who's a journalist, media critic, founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and co-founder of Roots Action. Jeff, always great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. And they can find the report at badblues.org.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have something really unfortunate to talk about today. It appears as though YouTube may be generally messing with independent news and politics channels like the channel we have, which now has close to 700,000 subscribers. Now, I can't speak as broadly about this as I would like to, but I'll tell you what's going on with our channel as a data point. In the last several months, including with the Steven Crowder, Carlos Maza fiasco, and for other reasons, there have been lots of people making allegations of political bias within news and politics at YouTube. There are allegations that YouTube is going after right-wing channels specifically, deprioritizing them, demonetizing them because they are right-wing. There are others who say it's left-wingers on YouTube that are actually being hurt by changes to the YouTube algorithm. And my position has basically been the same for a long time now, which is YouTube is prioritizing what makes them money by keeping advertisers happy. There is a lot of crazy right-wing content on YouTube that's going to get caught up in that. That includes conspiracy stuff. It includes racist stuff. It includes white nationalist content and separatist content. And there's also some left-wing stuff that's going to get caught in there. When left-wing channels talk about ongoing conflicts, whether they are in Syria or Iraq or Saudi Arabia, Yemen, whatever the case may be, there are algorithmic decisions that YouTube is making that are going to disproportionately hurt the left-wing channels talking about those issues, and they will not hurt, for example, the YouTube channels of corporate media outlets that are talking about those exact same issues. And there have been continued allegations through and through that YouTube is specifically going after one or the other side of the political spectrum. But what I'm here to tell you today, and I'm going to back it up with some data, is that at minimum, there is an apolitical targeting, not of left or right-wing content, but of independent content, which is, I believe, being deprioritized in lieu of corporate news channels. We are getting absolutely crushed on YouTube as a result of the algorithmic changes that have gone on. Now, I can't say if this is because of one thing or another. What I can tell you is that this predates the Steven Crowder, Carlos Maza fiasco. It may have been exacerbated by that, but this is bigger than that, and it's really just genuinely bad for our channel. To make money on YouTube, you need views, and the views need to be monetized, meaning it's not just views, but the views need to have ads play before them in order for us to make money. Now, there are a bunch of different ways that we get views on YouTube. One big way is called browse features. Browse features include, we have close to 700,000 subscribers on YouTube. When those people see our videos on their homepage under their list of subscriptions, that is called a browse feature view. If someone views our channel through something like that, it's mostly a function of subscribers. The more subscribers you have, the more browse feature views you are going to get. There's another one which is called suggested videos, which are those videos that YouTube suggests alongside on desktop or below on mobile, the video that you are watching. And this is a hugely variable source of views, and it is dependent on YouTube's algorithmic priorities. Our portion of views that come from this suggested video feed has declined by about 50%. Back in September, about 33% of our views were coming from the suggested features sort of umbrella. That number has dropped from 33% to under 17%. And I'll explain to you why this is such a big deal. This is about half of what we were once getting from this algorithm. And this decline started right after YouTube announced that in an effort to crack down on fake news, it will be doing more backing, as they say, of what they call authoritative sources. And of course, what might be a well-intentioned, good faith effort to crack down on fake news appears to be absolutely crushing independent producers like us. This decline from 33% to 17% of our views coming from YouTube's suggested videos feed is a huge blow to our revenue because it represents a ton of views. We had 3.5 million views in December, not on the entire channel, just from the suggested video feed, okay? In June, we'll be lucky to get 1.5 million views from the suggested video feed. That's a 2 million view shortfall, okay? That's a huge revenue shortfall. Now, I have to be careful because my understanding is that YouTube's terms and conditions say I can't give you specific revenue numbers, so I'm not going to. But losing 2 million views because of changes to YouTube's algorithm is a lot more money than most people in the audience would guess. Okay, let me put it that way. And in the meantime, although YouTube is claiming that they're putting in place a better, more efficient system to make sure the videos that are brand safe do get ads playing on them, look at what happened yesterday. We had a video from yesterday get 90,000 views in the first 4 hours. This is in the top 1% of our videos by getting 90,000 views in just the first 4 hours. This was a video about Donald Trump's interview with George Stephanopoulos, where they talked about Donald Trump's finances, and the video was instantly demonetized, as you can see from the yellow $sign on the screen. Monetized videos have a green $sign. There is nothing not brand safe in this video. We appealed the decision. We're told that those decisions should be reviewed within an hour, and it was not reviewed for about 14 hours. Until such time that the video had 110,000 views. It has now been remonetized, but we lost the revenue on 110,000 views. So listen, I have no control over this. I have no control over any of what's going on here. Channels like ours are uniquely positioned to be the most damaged from these algorithmic changes. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The big corporate news channels, CNN, whoever, they have huge ad revenue outside of YouTube. and YouTube is favoring them anyway, so they're fine. Really small channels don't depend on YouTube to fund ongoing multi-employee operations. They're fine. We, who are in the top 1.5% of YouTube, but not in the top 0.1%, we are the people who will most suffer. So what can we do? I've said it before and I'll say it again. We've got to separate funding from advertising. That's it, okay? We have direct support set up on our website where we get 98% of every payment, okay? We pay a 2% payment processing fee. 98% of the contributions through membership on our website go directly to funding the show. We're looking at launching channels in other languages with our content dubbed in very high quality to reach people who don't speak English. We've started paying for the subtitling and closed captioning of our channel already. We produce and give the show to 200 non-commercial radio and TV stations. All of that stuff costs money, and under 1% of our audience funds us directly through membership right now. If we can get to 2% of our audience funding us directly, we laugh about these YouTube issues. We'll be in great shape. If we can get to 3% of our audience funding us directly, we would be absolutely crushing it. So this has to be a wake-up call, okay? We've got to support the shows that we value directly if we can afford to do so. If you can't, that's okay. I'm still doing the show for you, okay? I don't need your last dollar, but if you're used to buying one of those lattes or two a month, consider going to www.joinpakman.com and saying, I can afford $3 a month. I can afford $6 a month. The coupon code, This Is 2020, will save you 40%. We're not talking about a lot of money. If you apply that code to the $6 a month membership, it's $3.60 a month, okay? If you apply that coupon code to the yearly membership, it'll drop it from $60 to just $36. Let's make this happen, because it's not anymore about this could happen. This is happening. We have lost half of our views on YouTube from the suggested video feed, and increasingly the suggested videos are corporate establishment legacy media. Let's make this happen, okay? I truly believe that our audience is going to understand the importance of this, and I look forward to coming back to you in a week and telling you how inspired and flattered I am from the audience support. There is a conservative British politician who wrung a Greenpeace activist's neck when she interrupted a speech in the United Kingdom a few days ago, and I'm going to set this up for you. Mark Field is a member of parliament, or an MP as they are known in the United Kingdom. He's 54 years old. He's a member of the Conservative Party in the UK, also known as the Tories. And a few days ago, Chancellor Philip Hammond was giving a speech about Brexit at what's called the Bankers and Merchants Dinner. Greenpeace. Greenpeace is the climate activist organization. They sent 40 volunteers to this event to try to interfere with the speech and get attention for climate change. One woman was walking around there as part of this protest, and Mark Fields got up and grabbed her and pushed her and then wrung her neck. Some might almost call it strangling from behind, although I don't know that that's the right term in this particular case. And there is video. So immediately the question is this treatment too rough for someone that seems to be one of 40 peaceful protesters? Some have argued she could have had a gun. Hard to imagine from the dress she was wearing that she had a gun, not to mention both of her hands were full of items, which would make it quite difficult to even get a gun out of her purse if that's what she had and where she had it. Fields is saying his reaction was, quote, instinctive given the circumstances, and Fields has since apologized to the woman. There are other MPs calling for this guy to go. Labour MP Tonia Antoniazzi says, quote, no one who reacts like this to a peaceful protest should be sitting in our parliament. Liberal Democrat MP Chuka Umuna says that the actions are totally unacceptable. Former Tory MP Sarah Wollaston says it was, quote, absolutely shameful, a male MP marching a woman out of a room by her neck. Labour Minister Don Butler tweeted, this is horrific. Mark Field must immediately be suspended or sacked. Bottom line, a woman in a ball gown with high heels holding a cell phone and a small purse is not the threat that instinctively was apparently what went to Mark Field's mind here. It's extremely difficult to buy that. Now, some people are making this a man versus woman issue, saying, oh, you're only upset because the protester was a woman, but it would have been totally fine if the protester had been a man. There is no question that gender is a factor here. I would argue it's a reasonable factor. But beyond that, a sitting MP putting his hands on a member of the public's throat is now what we're defending. I got an email from a viewer saying the way this guy reacted, his entire posture, his entire demeanor during this is of a classic domestic abuser. I would not argue that this guy is a domestic abuser, absent evidence that he is a domestic abuser. What I do believe is that this is a level of aggression that did come naturally to him in the moment. And I can also tell you that in the United States, far less aggressive physical attacks than this often lead to people being charged with battery. So I want to hear from you. What do you think about this? If you've been listening to the podcast or radio show and you didn't see the video that we just played for our video audience, find the video online and let me know what you think of it. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Received a voicemail about reparations for Black Americans. Let's take a listen.
Hi, David. It's Mike calling, and I was wondering, I watched the congressional hearing about reparations, and it was a very interesting dialogue. And I'm generally supportive of the idea of reparations, but I do think that the conversation going on right now does have the potential to backfire against the eventual Democratic nominee, and it has the potential to ignite the far right. And it is just generally unpopular with the wider American people, although I do think that we can make the argument for it. So thank you.
Yeah, listen, I don't know about the popularity of reparations for Black Americans among the broader American people. I've not seen polling about that. Here's my view on it. I think that there is a very valid and completely reasonable moral and philosophical debate to be had about reparations for Black Americans. How many generations after slavery does it go? How do you demonstrate that you are actually descended from individuals that were slaves in the United States rather than from families that came to the United States after slavery was abolished? I'm totally up for having that discussion. In practice, unless Democrats get a supermajority in the Senate, I don't see any way that reparations pass. And thus, I believe that in 2019, right now, this is a distraction of a conversation. And I believe that it is not a pragmatically smart path for Democrats at large to go down. That's my view. I don't see any way that you get a single Republican when it comes down to voting in the Senate, or maybe more than 3 or 4 Republicans. I just don't see any way forward for this. And as a result, I don't think that it's particularly smart politics to keep talking about this at this point in time. If you disagree, I do want to hear from you. We will talk on the bonus show today about how Bernie Sanders would cancel student loan debt and much, much more, including how Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway is straight up going to not show up to the Hatch Act hearing that has been scheduled. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member or a patron. I will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.